Hey, it's Savuti Marsh. This is a review of South Gate campsite at Moremi in Botswana. South Gate's about 30 kilometers from North Gate entrance and from the village of Khwai. Alternatively, you can also drive here directly from Maqwee. So there's a couple of options to get here. You can come directly from Maqwee. Otherwise, if you're coming from the Chobe / Kasane area, then you can come via Khwai village through the North Gate into Moremi and then drive through Moremi to South Gate. Once you've left these significant towns, the roads are almost entirely dirt road. Some of that road is properly built up road, a little bit slower going still because there are various dips in the road where water collects or where there's a bit of run through across the road. And if you're coming here from Chobe like we did, then it's quite a difficult drive getting out of Chobe onto the road to Khwai. Driving in the park itself from North Gate to South Gate, again, quite a decent road. A few dips in the road, of course, where water tends to pool, but not a very difficult route. You do need a 4x4 though, especially now in the wet season. In the dry season, you probably get away without a 4x4, but in the wet season, definitely a 4x4. And if you're driving from Chobe like we did, deep sandy roads, you definitely need a 4x4 for that. An important thing to note about these little pans of water on the roads is that a lot of the time there is a bypass around them, but sometimes there isn't. And you've got to be a bit careful. Some of those can get relatively deep, say up to about half a meter or so deep. We've seen a couple of people here with caravans and off-road caravans and off-road trailers. I do recommend that if you're going to come here with a trailer or caravan, you do have an off-road trailer or caravan. Like I said, there are many places where you've got to drive through a bit of water and mud. In the dry season, it might be quite different, but still, those dips are relatively steep getting in and out, so an off-road setup is a good idea still. There's no electricity here and there is no lighting. There isn't water at the campsites either. There are the remnants of piped water here to the campsites, but those have been removed, probably because of interactions with elephants. Almost every campsite has a braai, except ours. It doesn't have a braai for some reason. But most campsites have a braai, and it's quite a nicely built braai with the proper grate on it. So the braai facilities are quite decent. There's a fire pit as well at every campsite, and also a rubbish bin. Depending on where you are, shade can be quite sketchy, so the campsite we're on has very little shade. However, there are campsites closer to the ablution facilities where there are a lot more trees. Our campsite's about 25 by 25 meters, maybe a little bit more or less. You can easily fit 5 vehicles here and tents. It's probably better a little bit less, but I think you can easily fit that kind of setup here. We've seen other campsites where there are 3 cars and 3 family tent setups, so there's a fair amount of space on the campsites. The surface is relatively flat, it's all sandy and there's no grass. Being sandy is pretty good for the rain, so it won't get muddy on the site. If it does rain, that rain should percolate quite quickly through the sand. However, if you are going to camp here in the rainy season, there is evidence of some pooling of water in some areas on the campsite, so just take note of that. We're only here for one night, so we've used the rooftop tent and that's worked out pretty well. I think if anything, it would have been nicer to have a bit more shade, and if we had put up the ground tent, we probably would have placed the tent more strategically than we have the rooftop tent. Now, depending on the campsite you're in, the ones that we are in and surrounded by are fairly private, and there's a good amount of space and vegetation between yourself and the next campsite, probably about 40 or 50 meters on the one side, and on the other side almost 100 meters. So it is quite private. There's one road leading in and you don't get any traffic in and out except from your neighbor perhaps. The campsites that are closer to the ablution facilities in the central area, they are only separated by tree trunks. Basically, there isn't vegetation or foliage rather between the campsites. They're still pretty well spaced, but it's a little less secluded than the campsite that we are in now. The ablution facilities have showers, toilets and basins. There's hot and cold water there. The hot water is supplied by a solar geyser system. The hot water definitely does work. You just have to wait a while for it to get to you from the geysers that are a little bit of a distance from where the shower is. There's more than one ablution block, so there certainly is a good amount of capacity for the amount of campsites that are here. There are wash-up facilities behind the ablution box also, so 3 sinks and a concrete slab on which you can put your stuff when you wash and so on, so that's quite convenient too. Note though that the wash-ups only have cold water. Some of the campsites, especially closer to the ablution blocks, have concrete picnic tables as well, which is nice to have. That does make your life easier when you're camping. Fortunately, we have our own table, so we're quite good on this site without a picnic table, but it is nice to have one of those. You can't purchase very much here. Basically, you can get some firewood. Other than that, there is basically nothing that you can purchase. So you've got to bring everything that you need with you to the campsite. And on that note, of course, there is no fuel either, so you've got to have sufficient fuel when you come here. We're here in the summertime. Gates open at 5:30 in the morning and close at 7 p.m. So one of the things I like about our experience so far camping in the national parks in Botswana is that the campsites are assigned. So our campsite at this location was assigned. We're at camp number 8. I like that. It makes it so much easier. You don't have to worry about getting to camp early and trying to find a good camping spot and all the rest of it. You know that your campsite's assigned, and also it removes the likelihood of people encroaching on different campsites and so on. So campsites are pre-assigned. The management of the camp is pretty good. The bathrooms are impeccably clean. The guys have come through and cleaned out our dustbin and our fire pit, etc. The site was also clean when we got here, so it looks like a pretty well managed site. Booking details are below. It is a little bit complicated sometimes booking campsites in Botswana because they're managed by different little companies that manage different campsites. So details for booking at Moremi South Gate are in the description below. What to do? Well, we're in Moremi National Park, so it's all about the wildlife. So you can drive around the park from here. This area is fairly densely wooded with mopani trees, so not so easy to see the wildlife, but all the same, this is a big 5 park. The last time we were here, we had a herd of buffalo. Well, when I say we were here, we drove to Southgate from Maun just to check it out, and we came across a herd of buffalo and giraffes and many other species of wildlife. We haven't seen much in the time that we're here. We had a honey badger here last night, which is really cool. But other than that, because it's really thick, you don't see much. A bit of impala now and again, but the bush is very thick. This is an unfenced campsite. We're in Moremi National Park, which is a big 5 park. We haven't had any interactions except with a honey badger and some impala coming through the site so far. But take note that this is an unfenced campsite in a big 5 national park. Speaking of that honey badger, the dustbin that we have is closed, or was closed last night, but it still managed to tip it over, or swing it over rather. It's on a hinge to get at what's inside. So not sure how it did that, but obviously honey badgers are pretty determined, and this one was quite successful. So what type of camper is this for? Well, a couple of things to note, I think. Firstly, it's unfenced. Secondly, you probably need a 4x4 to get here, depending on when you're coming here and from where you're coming. No electricity and no water, so you've got to be prepared in respect of those aspects. Otherwise, it's a pretty easy place to camp. You don't need any special gear and so on, but you've got to be prepared. You've got to have the right equipment. It's great for us that we have a little solar system and we have a fridge in our car and so on. So it's easy camping. Of course, there's nice ablution facilities and so on, but it is unfenced and there's nothing that you can purchase, and there's no electricity, and I don't think there's any potable water. So what is there on the campsite? There's a fire pit, there's a dustbin, there's usually a braai stand except at our campsite. There are ablutions with showers, basins, toilets, cold and hot water. There is a wash-up area as well. Some campsites have a picnic table. Shade is good in the campsites near the ablution box, but in these private campsites or these secluded campsites, not so much shade. The campsites themselves are fairly large. There's no grass on the campsites, but it's relatively flat and it's all sandy, so not muddy or dusty. What's not here? No electricity at all. No lighting at the campsites. No water at the campsites, although there is lighting and water at the ablution facilities. I don't know if that water is potable. we always bring our own water with us unless it is clear that there's potable water at the campsite. No purchaseables, so no food, no snacks, no fuel, etc. You can only get wood. And no fencing, unfenced campsite. This seems to be pretty much a transit camp for most people, so everyone that we've seen here is just here for one night. We're also just here for one night on our way to Third Bridge. Like I've said a couple of times, the vegetation is quite dense, so there's not a lot of really great wildlife viewing to be had in this section of the park. So would I recommend it? Absolutely, yes. Great campsite, especially for the type of camping that we like to do. The site that we're on in particular is nice and secluded, and there are a couple of these sites. Like I say, that is very much a transit camp, I think. So I wouldn't really recommend spending more than one night here unless you just want to rest. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Hope you found it informative. Hit the like button if you did. If you want to support the channel, there is a link to buy me a coffee below, or hit the super thanks button. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comment section below. Thanks to everyone that has subscribed to the channel. If you haven't, then hit that subscribe button. It's always good to get feedback from you guys as well, so definitely do comment. And until the next episode, go everywhere, see everything, have a great time. Cool, done. Woo. Let's get out of here, bro. Mic test 1, mic test 2, mic test 3. I'm gonna mic test, yeah. This is your camping DJ.